Hi, welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Our guest today is Dr. Joseph Roberts. Joseph Roberts is a medical doctor based in the United Kingdom. He's of Ghanaian origin. He studied for his Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery at the University of Leicester. He's the director of AR Medical Limited and works with the NHS. Joseph Roberts is committed to bringing together through the African Professionals Forum people of various backgrounds who are working towards improving life for Africans and Africans in the diaspora. But before Dr. Joseph Roberts comes on, please click on the subscription button if you've not done so yet. And don't forget to also click on your bell, your notification bell. Thank you. So welcome to Sankofa Pan-African series, Dr. Joseph Roberts.
Thank you.
So let's start with you telling us a bit more about your background.
No, thank you, Dr. Bumi, for it's a privilege to be invited here. So my background, my roots are in Ghana, West Africa. Born there, left the country when I was 6 months because of my dad's work and postgraduate studies. Ended up in Nigeria.
Oh, yeah.
So spent the my very earliest memories will be of Nigeria because, age up to about 5. And then post-primary, we moved to the UK. So, yes, I've always had that Pan-African outlook because of that background of not really having that early experience of moving around the West African region. So I think those formative influences still play a major role. So post in the UK, I think my mum, because of her influence, she worked as a health professional, as a midwife. And I had uncles who were surgeons. So I think also that played a role in the career choice. And if you know anything about African parents, it's either doctor or lawyer. So I think fortunately for me, I found something that I liked. That's a little bit about me. Another thing about me is I like technology. So apart from my medical degree, I have done a program with one of the universities in the States in artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I'm interested in the intersectionality of health and technology to see what problems that can solve. I think there's huge scope for that, especially on the continent, to use applied technology to help leapfrog. So that's a little bit about me.
I just want to backtrack a little to how you related your experience as a Ghanaian who was partially raised in Nigeria before moving to UK, how all of that has informed your worldview, your view, seeing yourself as an African. And I know it has played a lot into a lot of your, should I call them extracurricular? Because you are a doctor by profession, but I know how active you are, about trying to get African professionals, to see themselves as catalysts. So please tell us what you have been doing in this area.
Just going back to that first question about formative years, the first thing to note is quite interesting. We talk a lot now about the Berlin Conference. So my dad was a minority in his own country. And so when we talk about the African diaspora being minorities in the West, when along tribal lines, my dad was a minority in Ghana. Yes, because his tribe was split in half as a result of the Berlin Conference. So the Ewe group in the Volta region in Ghana. So, and some of this I only realized or appreciated it as I got older. We'd go back for an anniversary, and then I'd hear that a grand uncle was coming from over the border in Togo. And then I started to think, oh, right, okay, so we have relatives in another country, speak the same language from the same, tribe, but in another country. So that also formed some of those influences are important. What my passion now is, um, realizing that the reality is that Africa has a capacity deficit. That's one reality. And every human being has the need to find fulfillment, to self-actualize. So if you're in an environment where your talents are not going to be fully realized, then you will migrate. Migration has been a part of human history. So it's no surprise that, the cream, shall we say, of the crop will leave an environment where they're not going to find fulfillment. So I feel that, some of Africa's best brains are outside the continent.
Definitely.
But I also believe that there is a chance with the new generation, partly because of the advent of social media. We live in an information age, that we can start to build bridges and reach across the divide. And I think that can be a powerful synergy in helping push Africa forward. So I think it starts with the professional group, those who have demonstrated that they can leave their countries, go into a foreign land, and still succeed. That takes some doing, but they can feed that back in knowledge sharing and nurturing the younger generation back in the continent. So that's why I founded Vital African. That's what we want to do, to reach back and enrich each other. We're not saying that the diaspora is superior to the people on the continent. We're saying there's value in knowledge exchange. So we can learn from each other. And the best way to do that is to encourage relationships, knowledge share, nurture our own talents, and support African-owned businesses. I think group economics is key to changing the narrative.
Okay, so by group economics, what kind of activities, what do you have in mind?
So it's interesting that we're talking about this, and the African continental free trade area came into existence this year, because again, it's quite obvious, but it's something we've not done previously. That you need to trade. You need to trade as a community to build up your economic power. You need to trade amongst entities within the same community, because what that does is it boosts your economic power, because it means that there are a couple of things that happen when you're in a business relationship. Trust is built up over time, and in that environment, you get feedback from the community. These skills are then transferred. If you trade and do business within the community, you keep your money in the community, and then that funds a lot of things in the community. You create jobs, and there's apprenticeship going on, because if we support African-owned businesses, which is what we're talking about when we say group economics, then those businesses, when they succeed, they have a sense of loyalty to the African family. The hand that writes the check calls the tune.
And
Um,
I think it just also follows logic, that this should be a vital part of the solution because it's an integral part of the problem. The Berlin Conference did not just divide Africa, into groups that belong to various European countries. When during all the period of colonization, all efforts, all resources were put into individual African countries to link them as channels for raw materials direct to the home colonial countries that were in charge of them. So telephones were easy. It was easier to make calls from French and Francophone Africa to France than to make calls from Francophone Africa to Anglophone Africa. As close as Benin and Nigeria, are, during colonial time, and until recently, it was easier to call Europe than to call one another. It's the same thing with trade routes and all of that. So it was deliberately done to keep us in pieces. So until we have this coherence in trading, and of course, we know that slavery, colonization did not only result in economic incapacity, but also in distrusts. We're made to actually look to the home colonizing country as the home place rather than our neighbor. So as a trader in colonial times, you had more faith in doing business with the UK than doing business with other African countries. So all of that must be repaired, and which is why I'm excited about this project you're doing. And I think we need to elaborate more on it, so that people know precisely, what you're doing and how to get involved.
So the premise, as he said, is quite simple. Reverse engineer the damage. That's what we're trying to do, because we know Europe went through an industrial revolution, and China has gone through that. You need a manufacturing base. You need a base that allows you to produce your own materials, use those, meet the local demand, export those. Whereas, yes, because of perhaps what's happened in the history of exploitation, if you take so many million people out of a continent, you've destroyed their economic base, you've destroyed their manufacturing base. And clearly, if I was a slave owner, you wouldn't take sickly people, you take able-bodied, because they needed them to build other worlds, which is what has happened. So the wealth, that was a process of wealth transfer. So at Vital Africa, what we're trying to do is, we're saying group economics, what does that look like? When we say investing on the African continent, we're focusing on our resource, and of course, the most important resources are Africa's people. The continent's blessed with natural resources, but the people are its most valuable resource. And when you talk about people, you're talking about a person's mind, really. You're talking about the capacity to innovate, to invent, and that starts with the education system. That starts with a sense of self. When you sit, to negotiate a business deal, and you have an inferiority complex, you've lost before the conversation is already started. So knowledge sharing is important. Skills, there's particular skill sets like entrepreneurship and the process of innovation. But not just that. You need business leaders who are comfortable in their own skin. They know their history. because that gives them a sense of identity. They can walk into a boardroom, and even if they're the only one there, they still are solid in their personality because they know there's a weight of history behind them, and the history, not the history that has been that the history that belongs or begins at slavery.
Yeah.
We have millennia of African excellence
And the fantastic trajectory until
Yeah,
the Arabs, Europeans, and colonization derailed us.
and and the thing is, this kind of education is, or this the ignorance of this history does not is not linked to your educational attainment, because even as a doctor, some of these things I wasn't aware of until I came across people who, again, one of the pluses of the information age, such information is now more readily available thanks to the work that you're doing on channels such as these. Um, and when you hear things like this, immediately your reaction is, why wasn't I taught this in school? And then it's important that we promote our own innovators, because others wouldn't do it for us. Now, we've been sold this paradigm of globalization, and that's interesting, but I want to make the analogy. If when you're in an airplane, before the plane takes off, you're given a demonstration, and the air hostess or whoever they are, in case of if the cabin pressure drops, the oxygen mask will come down. What you need to do is you need to put yours on first. Even if you have a baby, you put yours on first before you try saving that baby. So I feel we Africans are being told, you know, start looking after the baby first and then look after that. That's not going to work. And if people feel like I'm exaggerating, just look at what's happening with the COVID vaccine. In my network on LinkedIn, and I've seen African professionals complaining this is unacceptable. But I'll say, this is a fallacy of the current paradigm we're living in. Because when COVID happened, the first priority of any government is to look after its citizens. So governments want their citizens to be safe so that the economies can open. Now, Canada has bought enough so that each person is vaccinated 5 times over. Whereas some African countries are not going to see anything.
A lot of African countries don't even have a single vaccine yet.
Yeah. But I think starting with where we are, what we can do right now is, start forming strategic alliances and coalitions, and reaching, back across the divide, and being very strategic in what we want to achieve. And one will be economics, but there's another aspect that Africa needs to consider, and that would be, as someone in our network suggested, we need to stop the looting. And you do that by 2 things. You need to have powerful economic deterrence, but you also need to have a legal framework that allows you to go after companies and multinationals who are exploiting, the poor, exploiting.
Even governments like France, still extracting, still taking, money from their former colonies. We need to be able to go after them, have legal frameworks to make them stop all of that.
That's a big issue. And as people like Dr. Arakan has been saying, we talk about the report, I think, from South Africa's ex-president, Thabo Mbeki, that showed that corruption in Africa is costing Africa about 50 billion annually, but France takes from its former colonies numbers probably 13, about 500 billion. So I think that needs to be addressed. But the problem is you can only address that at a very high level. You need big legal corporation, African-owned legal corporations fighting that kind of battle. And the only way you do that, obviously there are two fronts. So the legal front, the economic front, and the public relations front. I think all three are critical to.
I think you've left out the educational front as well.
No, that's very important. So when I say economics, for me, I think I've embedded education into that. Okay. Because as we know, a good education gives the economic leverage. Mm-hmm. So, education, as we've discussed this previously, not just the sort of chew and pour model, but education that meets the local need. Yeah. So if you need engineers, you don't produce doctors, you produce engineers. If you need carpenters, you have schools to produce the carpenters you need for your. If you need people to build roads, we need to have systems for those. So those are all parts of what I'd call the economic framework. And with that, I'd put in education, because people need to know who they are, their identity. They need to know where Africa sits, and the need, how critical it is right now for Africa to unite, because otherwise the gap will just keep widening.
Thank you very much for being a part of this episode of the Sankofa Pan-African series. We'll be continuing this conversation with Joseph Roberts in the next episode.